Chapter 387. In the Hands of Terrorists, Part 1. On her return from Europe, Irshad did not confine her campaign against Islam in Toronto but began to speak in many cities in Canada. When the Muslims could not silence her through the law and threats, they began to plot her assassination. She received emails from many Islamic terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other jihadist groups threatening to kill her if she continued to speak against Islam. Irshad ignored those emails and went on exposing the evils of Islam. Whereby, when nothing could scare or silence her, a secret deal was made between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and a gang in Canada. That gang was initially created by some Sudanese immigrants living in Canada. It was called Mad Cow Gang. Mad Cow Gang was the most dangerous and notorious gang in Western Canada. In the beginning, the Mad Cow Gang was like any other gang, but when its leadership fell in the hands of some Muslim terrorists, it became the most dreadful gang in the country. It defied the law in Canada, challenged the police authority, and overruled other gangs. For the first time in human history, religious terrorists and gangsters joined hands together. There were a lot of things to say about that Mad Cow Gang, but the most important was that some Muslim converts joined the gang while they were gangsters in jail, and when they came out became the main leaders of the group. There was a rumor that the gang infiltrated inside the police. Whether that rumor was true or not, it is hard to verify. It was during her brief stay in a hotel after her speech in the city of Winnipeg that the Mad Cow Gang was able to plan her kidnap and assassination. 3 gangsters from that Muslim terrorists gang entered the hotel and kidnapped Irshad at the gunpoint. Unfortunately, when those gangsters came in, there were no security guards to prevent them from carrying out their kidnap. Some employees and workers of the hotel stood helpless and pleaded for their lives when the gangsters waved their guns on their frightened faces. When the police arrived in the hotel, the gangsters had already gone along with their victim. The police questioned the hotel staff with the hope of obtaining some clues to lead them to the identities of the kidnappers, but all in vain. Even the surveillance cameras did not reveal anything about those daring kidnappers. The cameras showed that the 3 kidnappers wore masks to hide their faces. Nevertheless, the police concluded that the kidnappers most probably were Muslim terrorists. When the cops reached this conclusion, they passed the information to the media. The kidnap of Dr. Irshad happened in a city called Winnipeg in Western Canada. That was the last place on earth Irshad expected the hands of the Islamic terrorists would reach her. However, it seemed Canada became like Europe, that Muslim terrorists scattered in every city and town. The kidnap of Irshad was considered the end of her life. Everyone in the world concluded that she was already executed by Winnipeg Muslim terrorists. The city police left no stone unturned over in search for her body. The police, like anyone else, concluded that the terrorists had already assassinated Irshad. The Muslim world rejoiced and celebrated on the streets the kidnap and assassination of Irshad. Non-Muslim nations received the sad news with grief and fear. Many journalists concluded that Islam, like the mafia, that no one could join and leave it or criticize it without being exposed to imminent physical annihilation. A police officer in the RCMP raised some doubts about the former conclusion of the Winnipeg police. He doubted that the kidnappers were Islamic terrorists. He argued that if the kidnappers were religious terrorists, why didn't they assassinate Irshad in the hotel itself? What was their motive of kidnapping her? Furthermore, if they were Muslim terrorists, why didn't they behead her in cold blood and upload their brutal execution on the internet? This new theory came out after the police lost hope of finding the dead body of Irshad. This conclusion redirected the attention of the police to the possibility of including a gang behind the kidnap. Accordingly, it might not be a terrorist job after all. But this new theory had many questions that needed to be answered before the police would drop its former conclusion and focus on it. Why should a gang kidnap Irshad? The first clue surfaced when the police spotted in one of the surveillance cameras the face of a notorious gangster. That gangster entered the hotel along with other 2 suspicious men on the same day Irshad was kidnapped at the gunpoint. The police quickly connected the dots and concluded that the 3 gangsters masked their faces after they entered the hotel. The police did thorough investigation about that gangster. It appeared that he was released recently after he served his sentence in a maximum security penitentiary. During his stay in jail, the gangster was converted to Islam by some inmates who were still in prison. This startling finding refuted the new theory and resurrected the former conclusion that Irshad was kidnapped by Muslim terrorists. Therefore, the police began to search for that gangster. The police knew the gangster was a top leader in the notorious Mad Cow Gang. He was known as Nicholas Johnson before he embraced Islam. After his conversion in jail, he changed his name to Bilal Ahmed. Bilal became so religious in his last 2 years in prison. He grew up a long beard and began to recite the Quran and pray regularly with other Muslim inmates. Bilal's religious behavior somehow convinced the jail authority that he became a good man, and hence he was set free through parole before he completed half of his term. Shortly after his release, Bilal visited the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and performed the Islamic pilgrimage to Makkah and Medina. When he returned to Canada, he brought with him a Somali girl as his wife. He now was known among his fellow Muslims as Haj Bilal. The police arrested Haj Bilal and interrogated him. At first, the Haj denied that he visited the hospital on that day. However, he was confronted with the video that showed very clear what time and which day he was spotted entering the hospital with other 2 men. Haj Bilal claimed that he had totally forgotten his visit to one Somali man who was related to his wife and was in the hospital on that day. The police was able to verify the claim of Haj Bilal when it appeared that there was a Somali man hospitalized on the same day the kidnap took place. Hence the police allowed the Haj to go back to his house but kept him under observation.